Good afternoon. Hello. We're going to get started. It's nice to see so many people here today enjoying a free lunch. My name is Donna Lucas, and I am the chairperson for the Public Policy Institute of California, and I am delighted to be here to welcome you all here today on behalf of the board. This is our final event for PPIC's 2015 speaker series on California's future, and I'd like to thank our sponsors who have been so generous to donate for this to allow for the speaker series to happen, and you can see them on the back of your program, and you can also see them right here on the screen. So let's give a round of applause for them. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle, which is a group of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Funding from our sponsors and donors makes programs like today possible and ensures that they are free and open to the public in person and online. So thank you again for our donor circle. I encourage you to learn more about the PPIC Donor Circle, and you can do that by checking out our website or by looking at the programs on the table and or talking to a PPIC staff member, which we have plenty here. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Can you please look at your phones and turn them off? And no texting or talking during the program. We're going to check on that. No, just kidding. Also, you'll get a follow-up email from PPIC, which is a survey, because that's what we do. We really want to hear your thoughts about the program and how we can make this experience better, so if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to do that. So now on with the program, and to get things started, I'd like to invite our president, Mark Baldassare, to the stage with Nancy McFadden from the Office of Governor Jerry Brown, who is the governor's chief of staff. Her official title is Executive Secretary. And just a personal note, I'd like to thank Nancy for taking the time to really come and talk about these priorities. We have a sold-out crowd, Nancy, because you're here, so thank you.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this conversation today. And we're looking forward to really a very informative event here.
Don't get your hopes up.
I don't think that Nancy McFadden needs much of an introduction, but I will just say that she has had a career in state and federal government and in the private sector in leadership positions in policy and politics and legal affairs, and we're fortunate to have you here today. I'm fortunate that Nancy comes here in the position of Executive Secretary for Governor Brown, and we're going to mostly be forward-looking, but it doesn't hurt to pause for a moment and take a look at what's going on now and maybe reflect a little bit on the past, but to get us in the forward motion for this conversation, I think we'd all be very interested in your perspective on what do you think the three biggest issues are that will require bold leadership in the coming year?
You even gave that question to me in advance, and I still have to pause to think. There are so many issues, and I have to say that when I was walking up here, what I was thinking of is I got invited to the Sheraton at Sacramento, and other people were invited to Maui. and Carol and Loni and Darrell and Jim are all here at the Sheraton in Sacramento and not Maui, too.
There we go.
In any case, three biggest challenges. Look, there's lots of challenges, and I know on the panel next you'll hear probably even more than I'll mention. I'm going to be sort of consistent with what I said last year, Mark, which is these don't sound like things that require bold leadership, but I would assert they absolutely do. And one is keeping the state on the fiscally stable road that we have finally found and have stayed on for the last few years. And that is something that is a continuing challenge. In fact, we believe that that's kind of the work of the governor and the governor's office every day. You saw when the governor reviewed bills and vetoed a number of bills that were worthy ideas in and of themselves because they had budget implications for the state general fund. He said, these need to be evaluated in the context of the budget, not one-offs. So continuing that work on fiscal stability, on keeping the state's finances on good and solid ground, on continuing to pay down debt. We've done a fantastic job over the last few years paying down all of the Schwarzenegger recovery bonds, paying down a lot of the debt owed to our schools and local governments. But we still have more, and we've got retirement issues that we need to do. So we need to focus on the state budget, and that is going to require bold leadership. It's going to require tough decisions, and there's going to be a lot of conflicts. People are going to want to, and understandably want to, invest in new things because of the other challenges presented to us. And our bold leadership challenge will be to strike the right balance. I think the second issue is, again, I mentioned it last year, is continuing to implement the far-reaching proposals that we have adopted over the past year and make sure we're doing it wisely and well for the people of California. And that's everything from the work we're doing on prison realignment, but also broader criminal justice work, the work we're doing with our schools and the local control funding formula, sending more money to our neediest students and shifting control to the local school districts. We've invested so much more money in education over the last few years, a 45% increase in what we're sending to our schools because what we've done with our budget. So we need to make sure that that money is being spent well and that we're doing right by our students. And then I think the third challenge from our perspective in the Brown administration won't surprise you, and that is the whole panoply of climate change and environment issues that are facing not only our state, but our world. The governor always calls climate change the existential threat to our planet, and we in California are doing lots of ambitious and aggressive things to deal with climate change, but we also have very real, immediate issues that are related. And we've got, obviously, the drought that we have to continue to manage. We've got wildfires that we must manage, and we've got floods now. So we have this strange world of extreme weather events that we've got to be prepared to manage all of it. So those are our three, I think, big umbrella challenges. All of them, I think, require bold leadership, and sometimes bold leadership means saying no.
Yeah, thank you. And those are consistent with some of the themes from last year. And I just want to...
We're consistent.
Yes. And I just want to pick up on the last point on climate change. Obviously, the governor is getting ready he'll be going to Paris in a few days. There's the UN conference. As you prepare for that event, how do we translate the bold leadership that California has shown in climate change, this year passing SB 350, as well as what we're currently doing, to taking global action? Well,
I think California is really seen as a model for the world. I know the president has cited California and California's work in setting ambitious targets, but also balancing it with trying to reach those targets and climate emissions, carbon emissions reductions in a wise and careful way. And I think if you look at the state's economy over the same period of time in which we have been ramping up our efforts on climate change, there's been really no impact. And so I think the reason that the governor has been asked really to be on the world stage, the only governor, the only subnational leader, except for mayors that were invited to a conference at the Vatican, was Governor Brown. Governor Brown was specifically asked by the UN to go to Paris because they want a leader who has been so vocal, so passionate, so intellectual, about this global threat, but also somebody who has presided over very real changes and very real advances in fighting climate change. And so that's why he's going to Paris. He's not going to Paris because it's the place to be. And certainly, I mean, we stop for a moment. And when you asked about challenges, of course, really one of the greatest challenges, and it's not a specific state challenge, but one that is, of course, on all of our minds is what's happening in the world, and when we saw what happened in Paris.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because I'm sure it's on all of our minds. You know, we have certainly both a security threat that now everybody is thinking about, but also the Syrian refugees. And the governor came out and spoke about Syrian refugees yesterday. And tell me how the state is thinking and reacting to the events in Paris in the last week, and just the increase in terrorism that we're seeing the last few weeks.
Well, clearly, you know, our hearts go out to the people in Paris, and you know, the only known American killed in that attack was a young California student. So we all, you know, should take just a moment and pause on that, of course. Our first and foremost responsibility is to make sure that we're doing everything we can, and there are limits to what a governor can do, but everything we can to ensure the safety of the people of California. And much of that we can't discuss, but we're doing that. We are in our statewide Homeland Security folks are coordinating with local law enforcement, are coordinating with federal law enforcement. So we are on top of it as much as one can be in this rapidly changing, very difficult environment. We, of course, have things in California like the upcoming Super Bowl, where we have to be extraordinarily mindful, and I know that law enforcement is very, very cognizant of that and is preparing for that, as well as other kinds of things that are going on in California. California has lots of big venue events and that kind of thing. With respect to the Syrian refugees, what the governor said is, first of all, the placement of refugees is a federal responsibility, a federal decision, and in fact, despite what you read about other governor statements, a governor really doesn't have the power to stop the federal government from placing refugees. And the federal government works with non-governmental organizations to place refugees in communities. The thing that the governor also said was that we have a long tradition of being a place of asylum for those who are threatened and are vulnerable. But we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to insist that the federal government is doing adequate vetting and is doing everything it possibly can to make sure that it's being done in a careful and wise way. And it was reported, so I can talk about it briefly, but he was on a call with the White House just yesterday, and he made this very point that we need to know what you're doing. Not just your line of communication shouldn't just be with NGOs. It should also be with state government. We should know what you're doing, and you need to keep us apprised of the advances in your vetting system, because we need to make sure that we need to be a check on you, basically.
Well, these are certainly times that where leadership matters, and it's good to hear. So I want to come back to next year now. Last time you and I spoke was, I think, in your office this summer, and we talked about the special session that was going on for transportation funding and healthcare funding. And I didn't see a lot of movement there this year in the legislature, and I'm wondering, these are very big, important issues. The governor laid out the transportation funding challenge. We know with the growth of Medi-Cal and the growth of healthcare expenses, that's a big challenge. So what's the way forward next year?
Well, the way forward when things require 2/3 votes are always a little treacherous. And perhaps Mr. Brulte will, I'm sure Mr. Brulte will speak to that on the next panel. We think both of these things do need attention, and we're going to continue to bat at it. On the healthcare side, we think the proposal that was a fairly modest proposal, but it's about $1 billion for an MCO tax, is an important proposal. And if we don't get it, those costs are going to have to be picked up by taking money away from something else. And we're continuing to work on it. We had a number of the health plans that were supportive and thought it was the right thing to do when you look at the overall healthcare system, that it was an appropriate contribution to make. We had a few that did not believe that. And of course, there's no assurance that even if we get the entire industry and everybody else to support this, that we'll be able to get the votes that we need. Some will say, oh, you have enough money in the general fund to do it without the MCO tax, and we don't agree, because a lot of the money that we see, first of all, we don't know where we're going to be, and our Department of Finance has not done its estimate of revenues for next year. We're hoping we're going to be better off than we projected, but there are a lot of costs coming down the pike that are not factored in. Labor negotiations. All of our unions are up. That's going to put increased costs into the general fund. If a minimum wage is passed by ballot or by communities or by the state, if we decide that that's the right thing to do, that automatically adds money to the general fund. If we go to a $15 minimum wage, it'll be a $3 billion addition to the general fund. So we have to account for these things. And so that's why we look at the overall budget and try to figure out how we can do it. That's why we think an MCO tax. We also have a lot of additional healthcare costs with the IHSS program and other things. So we think it's a wise proposal. We're going to continue fighting for it. And if we don't, we're going to have to take from somewhere else.
So when the governor came in 2011, tried to work with the legislature, and ultimately went to the voters in 2012. The governor went to the voters on different matters in 2014. Is there any chance that the governor will ask the voters to weigh in on either the transportation or the health care?
We don't have any plans and are not really thinking about that right now. On the transportation piece,
let's talk about that
piece. The transportation piece is also incredibly important. And I think every single person sitting here, I think probably driving in today or taking whatever form of transportation would probably have some personal experience in knowing that our transportation system needs help. And again, just saying the general fund can pick that up doesn't make any sense. It does not provide for the kind of stable and planned funding that something like transportation infrastructure demands, because priorities change, and that's the first place, and we've seen that in past years, and I'm sure Darrell particularly knows, transportation was one of the first places when money was needed for something else, that money was taken away. So we think we really do need to do something. We're going to put forward our transportation proposal again, maybe with some slight modifications. We're still working on that in the January budget, and we're going to work on it. I think there are a lot of people that care about the transportation issue, and I know the governor believes that we've got to do everything we can to fight for it, but we also need people who care about the issue to rise up too. And so I think we're looking for there to be some outside agitation and support on this issue, and maybe we can move something down the line. And there are options. There are definitely options, and there's room to negotiate on that if there are people wanting to negotiate.
So part of leadership is having the long-term vision and really yeah, being visionary. And the two proposals that the governor has, which I don't expect that it's all going to be resolved by next year, but I'd like you to talk about the high-speed rail and the Delta tunnels and what we might expect from next year. These are visionary issues, you know.
Well,
these are long-term.
They're long-term, and they're both, and you know, they're both cooking along. Is the truth? I mean, they're both on their independent paths. The Delta project is one that's going through extensive environmental review and otherwise, and that's proceeding, and that's where our water team is focused on that. But in addition to that, we're focused on a lot of other things. You know, we're focused on restoring the Delta. We're putting bond money into that. We're doing a lot of work that is paired with the pipes or tunnels project, however you want to frame it, but is a separate piece that we're doing no matter what, and we're working on that. On high-speed rail, that too is, no pun intended, but I can't, I'm moving down the track. And you know, we have there, I think, done from the administration standpoint the best that we can do in putting the best people on. We have a very strong authority, really talented, conscientious, good people there with Dan Richard as its chair. And we've got a terrific executive director. The project, when we took it over, was really in shambles and frankly should have been shelved without the work that we did to revitalize it and put an entirely new cast in charge of it. Work is happening in the Central Valley as we speak. Continued environmental reviews, continued a lot of work, and continued looking at how we can fill out the financial picture of supporting it, including looking for private investment. We're not at that point yet, but we could be in the near future.
Coming back to the Delta and the water issue, I have a public opinion question and leadership for you. So we're in the middle of a drought. Next year we're expected to have an El Nino year. How do you manage that? How do you manage expectations when it starts raining?
Well, it's tough, and we're trying. You know, we are still in a drought. There's no doubt about it. And I know. I think you recently put out a big
we're in a
water
drought.
report.
Yes. But it's going to rain.
But it's going to rain. And I don't have the. I actually asked somebody for a very good. Pointed analogy so that I could explain why, even if it rained, we're still in a drought. And I haven't gotten the exact, but it's like we'd have to have rain every day for like the next 9 months or something like that to really be able to get out of the drought. And that's not exact, but that's sort of the kind of in range what folks believe. We have a very extensive team across the administration that are focused on both drought and storm preparedness because they're very obviously related. I think you will probably see the governor take some actions in the near future on storm preparedness. We've been doing a lot. Our team has been doing a lot. We do a lot that we don't, as I say a lot, and as most of you know, we don't put press releases out on everything we do, but we're doing a lot of managing with respect to upcoming storms. And I think the governor will be doing something publicly to try to explain the conflict between drought and upcoming storms.
Terrific. Well,
and we also really don't know, and the scientists aren't actually clear that El Nino really will bring a lot of rain. I mean, we really don't know what we're preparing for, but we got to prepare for it all.
Right. And that's next year. I know that you have another appointment to go to, and we have another panel, but I have just one more question for you, and that is, we come back here, let's say, November 19th, 2016, a year from now. What would you most hope was accomplished in the year?
Wow. Well, I hope we continue to make a lot of progress on drought and other environmental management, and I hope we make progress on the climate change issue. I hope I'm very hopeful that something I'm very proud that we did last year in the budget, the Earned Income Tax Credit, really helps a lot of Californians. And when I talked about that we spend time focusing on implementation, that's another good example, because we are working very closely with the Speaker, with Controller Betty Yee, and with some really terrific outside philanthropists, including a man by the name of Joe Sandberg, who's very, very committed to this issue, to make sure that we are reaching the Californians who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit. Because the truth is that many Californians qualify for the federal Earned Income Tax Credit and don't get it. And so you'll be hearing from us in the next couple of weeks about some real efforts and programs that we have to reach all the people who can qualify for that. So I hope that those efforts really bear fruit.
Terrific. Nancy, thank you very much for your insights.
Sorry, I'm going to
and
miss
for
the
your
next
leadership.
panel.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we just need to take about a minute to reconfigure the stage, and then John Myers and the panel is going to come up. I'm going to introduce John. Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And everybody knows, of course, John Myers. He is a veteran journalist around Sacramento. He's been in radio and television and radio, and now he's the Sacramento bureau chief of the Los Angeles Times. And he's going to do a terrific job with this panel. So just give us a moment and we'll get organized. Thanks.
All right, you rowdy crowd. It's as though you came to see a UFC cage match in Australia. It's the only thing I could come up with. So the long delay between introductions and on with the program, but I appreciate, as always, the folks at PPIC letting me be involved. And again, my name is John Myers. I'm currently the bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times, or as my wife says, the guy who can't hold down a job in Sacramento, because I seem to be moving all around the media world. But we've got some really smart people here today to talk about a topic that is not easy to define, I think, in some ways. Leadership is one of those things you know it when you see it some, and I think all four of these folks have certainly done that. You know, before we overpromise that we're going to tell you everything about leadership, I thought that it was worth remembering something that a lot of people in this room have read before, that was written by Carey McWilliams 65 years ago, when we talked about this unusual state that we live in California. I like this quote. He said, "The analyst of California is like a navigator who is trying to chart a course in a storm. The instruments will not work, the landmarks are lost, and the maps make little sense." So there's some optimism. But the men and women, I think, who serve in the legislature, they are those navigators. They have to figure out where the state is headed, why it's headed that way, where it should be headed. And I think how they have done it, how they should do it more, and how it might be done in the years to come is kind of what I hope to discuss out of this panel. So the folks here are well known, but I'm going to introduce them briefly. Closest to me, State Senator Carol Liu, a Democrat from La Cañada Flint Ridge. Jim Brulte, who has lots of titles, but these days he is the chairman of the California Republican Party, former leader of the state Senate and state assembly Republicans at different times. State Senator Loni Hancock, Democrat of Berkeley, to his side. She's to your right today, but we'll see if that lasts. And to the far right, the former Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, now candidate for mayor of Sacramento, which we will not talk about mayoral issues at this point. That's for another panel maybe someday. So all of these folks know a lot about leadership. They have been in the trenches. And we asked them to kind of start off with a singular question here, give everybody a moment to kind of weigh in on the notion of leadership. And that question simply was, where have each of you seen bold leadership in California making a difference in creating change, in creating policy change? What, when you think of bold leadership having that kind of impact, what comes to mind? And at the randomness of the row, Senator Liu, how about if you take a stab first?
Let me just start off by saying that this is kind of a slow burn, because I'm going to compliment my fellow senator here, Loni Hancock, when she authored Proposition 25. And Proposition 25, you remember, we were all in these battles about 2/3 votes for budgets. Remember those days?
Senator Brulte definitely remembers those days.
We call those the good old days.
Proposition 25 essentially gave us, the legislature and the people voted for it, the right to have a majority vote budget. And leadership, as I remember in those days, I mean, we really didn't pay much attention to Ms. Hancock and her desire to change the rules of the game, so to speak. And she went out quietly and with help, a lot of help, raised the money and got the people of California to vote for Proposition 25. It's made an incredible difference in how we have passed our last few budgets. So when you talk about leadership, I mean, it's a perfect example about how things move and how you get things going and rolling along.
Senator Brulte?
Yeah.
Chairman Brulte?
Rather than talk specifically, as we discussed, I want to make some general comments about leadership, particularly in Sacramento. And this is an observation, it's not a criticism. Whether it's a conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat legislative body, the dirty little secret is legislative bodies respect, they react to, and ultimately they reward strong chief executives. So, and by the way, I would not, I'm not sucking up because, I don't have any clients in Sacramento. Nobody wants to hire the chairman of the minority party. Governor Brown's actually a strong governor. As was Pete Wilson, which is how they could bend the legislative will to their point of view. Second point I want to make is, again, this is, by and large, legislative bodies are constitutionally incapable of adult action. And the reason for that is, if you're a chief executive, the chief executive has to be the adult, because a chief executive can set a goal that's highest and best and wield an entire administration towards that goal. Legislative leaders, Darrell knows this, he had to get 20 senators to agree with him, 41 assemblymen, and then a governor, or 27, 54, and a governor. And so legislative bodies tend to get the lowest common denominator. So strong leadership is generally best if it comes from the chief executive. That said, there are scores of examples over the last 3 decades of legislators leading, whether you remember Hill Eisenberg, a liberal and a conservative, Republican and a Democrat, who put together the Hill Eisenberg budget that ultimately became the template for the budget deal in 1993. But the last point I want to make is, and I think sometimes the media gets this wrong, moderates tend not to be able to put together the global deals within the legislature because they don't have much of a constituency. When you look at most of the great deals that were done over the last 3 decades, you had a liberal and a conservative of either party putting the deal together because they had a constituency they could bring. When John Burton put together a deal that the liberals didn't particularly like because it was liberal, you couldn't challenge John Burton's liberal credentials because frankly, he was liberal before some of the assembly members were even born. So 3 points: strong chief executives get what they want. Legislatures publicly criticize strong chief executives, but they bend to strong chief executives' will. And the great deals are done basically by a liberal Democrat and a conservative Republican figuring out where they can meet and bringing their caucus constituencies with them.
Well, I think as we move to Senator Hancock, you've actually set a really interesting point that everyone else can talk about leadership being particularly challenging in the legislature, where you have so many members and so many views and not that singular power that a chief executive can have.
And it was complicated by term limits because, you know, if you're only here for 3 or 4 years, you know, you haven't established the bona fides with your core constituencies to be able to, like Nixon, go to China. With the change in term limits, I think we're going to see greater ability of legislators collectively to lead because they're going to have more time on task. They're going to know the full extent of what they're doing.
So it has set the table nicely. Senator Hancock, this notion of leadership affecting policy change that you have seen or been a part of.
Well, I think there's no doubt, as Jim indicated, the governor's got the platform, especially with less and less media actually focused on Sacramento. Pro tems and speakers have a little bit more, and we in the trenches have to slog along, but we try to. I was interested in the question, bold leadership? What about informed leadership? What about sustained leadership, like Jim indicated, carrying through in a long period of time? Having said that, I can think of quite a lot of examples. Governor Brown, with SB 109, actually blew up a box. Realignment. Our correction system has to change. That was both bold and prompted by losing a United States Supreme Court decision. So sometimes bold leadership comes about as a result of crisis. You have to do something, and all of a sudden it becomes possible to look at things that weren't possible before. But there's also sustained and informed leadership. I want to just say Darrell Steinberg's sustained commitment to mental health actually changed the way we look at a lot of issues. And Senator Carol Liu, and thank you, Carol, for Prop 25, shout out, but I have watched her and served with her on the Education Committee for over a decade now. And I will tell you, in the last few years, I would say in her quiet way, except there was a lot of pushback. We had some really raucous Education Committee meetings. She has completely changed the focus of our community college system, in my view, for the better. And also worked closely with me on the corrections reforms that we need, particularly around women in prison and their children and families. So I guess my takeaway is, yes, it's a slog. It varies with where people are, but we move forward.
The art of the possible. Well, I guess the disadvantage to going last is that they said a lot of what I wanted to, what I intended to say. I think my big picture observation is the following. I don't necessarily like the following statement, but I think it's true, that most transformational change occurs during crisis. And I cite 3 examples, and 2 of them have already been cited, because I was going to mention Prop 25 as well. We underestimate, and I know it's a bit of partisan, but if we even step beyond the partisanship for a moment, there was no greater symbol of Sacramento dysfunction than late summer budgets. And while leverage, as we call it in the business, is appropriate, and that's how deals get made, I would argue that it became a ritual that went beyond how to make an agreement and how to make a deal, and it became plain dysfunctional. And the fact that Loni decided to take this on really rather quietly and organize the labor constituencies to to put the money in, and then added the poison pill about the legislative salaries, which I think we're still owed 2 weeks of pay from 2011, by the way.
I think we tested that in court one time.
Yes, we did, but was transformative. It was transformative. I think about realignment as well, born out of crisis. I don't know that we would have ever done that had it not been for the budget crisis. And you remember when Governor Brown took over, we had shrunk the deficit from 42 billion to about 26 billion. And so realignment was the right public policy to align resources and responsibilities, but it was also budget driven because the state could not carry that load. And then finally, I see, there are many examples, of course, and hopefully we'll talk about them, but what stands out for me are the singular acts of courage. And again, Jim probably wouldn't agree with me, or Mike, but I always point to Dave Cogdill and Mike Valines in 2009, when the state was literally 48 hours from a tacit bankruptcy, and the bond markets were about to collapse. And these two leaders are every bit as conservative as I was and Karen Bass was liberal. And to save the state, and it was an imperfect deal, by the way, because it didn't end the deficit, but it did chop it from the 42 to 29, and then we went to 26 and 19 and 11, and before you know it, the state now has a surplus after all of these years. But that was the beginning of the end. But that singular act of courage for those two individuals, as well as the few members they brought along, changed their careers, not in a good way. Those singular acts of courage were transformative in my view, and Lord knows, on both sides of the aisle, we need more of that every year. Thank you.
I have many more questions, and I'll get in, and I'll try not to do it as a lightning round as though it was a debate. But I want to talk about one particular part that, as a reporter watching this place and kind of watching the political universe around California, seems to come up often. And I think it's an interesting place to talk about leadership, and that is that policy and political leadership in California always has that other element of the voters having a role. And the voters can take the role, and the voters can take charge anytime they want, or anybody leads them to take charge. Because we have that robust system of direct democracy. In your time in elective office, any of you, and this is kind of a conversation, so it's thrown out anywhere you want to go, did that kind of power, that shadow, or whatever we would call it, did it factor into success at leading on an issue, or stimulate you to get going on an issue? It is a unique part of the California system of government, really, frankly, unlike anywhere else, given the power of that system. But does it impact the ability to be a leader or to influence that debate here in Sacramento?
Sure. You want me to start from this end? I know in 2003, I was chairing the Appropriations Committee. In 2004, I chaired the Budget Committee in the Assembly and recognized the perils of ballot box budgeting. Because this parallel system of power that we have, the initiative process, sometimes often collides with limiting the choices that representative government and a legislature has to make in terms of balancing a budget. And so I knew that, but I felt so strongly that the state had failed to fulfill its promise made in the 1970s when it deinstitutionalized the mentally ill, to provide a better system of community care, that I said, and I wasn't hypocritical, because if I was, I at least admitted it. I said, despite my concern about ballot box budgeting, this issue is so compelling to me that I believe we ought to go to the ballot. And we did.
Prop 63.
Prop 63, and that was a use of the initiative process, now generating $1.8 billion a year, and though it hasn't, quote, solved the problem, where would we be without it? A lot of people getting help. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but the initiative process is an outlet that can be used for good or not so good. I know, I'll turn it over here in a second. Last year, one of my last acts was, in 2014, was to author initiative reform legislation that does many things, but including allowing the initiative proponent to withdraw their initiative much closer to the election. now when you file and initiate your signatures in February, you're in if the signatures are valid. Now you can withdraw up until around July, end of June, middle of July. And that allows more time for a negotiation between the initiative proponent and the legislature or other initiative proponent to substitute a legislative solution to the problem that the proponent's trying to solve. That's a good change.
It is a good change. If I
Please,
could
go
just
ahead.
say, I was going to mention that, Darrell. It could be a very profound change that really reshapes what's possible with the initiative system, because we now have to have a hearing on proposed initiatives. If you can sit down and negotiate, catch those unintended consequences ahead of time, it makes a huge difference. Let me just say, I think the initiative system is perilous and we need it. And we can all think of things where the legislature, for a variety of reasons, sometimes connected to powerful interests that make campaign contributions, was unable to act on an important issue. And whatever people, one of the examples I can think of is I used to carry all these bills for humane treatment of animals that were in the food system. And we could never get them out of the Ag Committee, and we could never get them off the floor. And the Humane Society did an initiative, and it passed with 64% of the vote or something. It tells you the people were ahead. We can't do criminal justice reform very well in the legislature, although we've been doing better lately. Prop 47, Prop 36, changing 3 strikes, lowering sentences for many low-level crimes. The public is ahead of the legislature here. And we couldn't do these things without that. Having said that, we know the initiative process in this large, complex state is subject to being gamed just like anything else. So we have had those initiatives in which the natural gas company writes an energy efficiency initiative, which lo and behold will only give the public subsidy to one company, that kind of thing. And that's a problem. But it's part of that larger problem, I think, about how we keep democracy robust and the people's trust in democracy as the way of solving our problems.
But let me jump in and talk about one of the challenges. You know, when we're talking about leadership, leadership is a broad term. It can mean leading your fellow colleagues in the legislature. It can mean leading the public. It can mean leading the conversation with Californians. And part of this, to me, is the challenge is defining who you're leading and who your constituency is as the leader. Whether it is everyone in your district, whether it is the whole state, whether it is your party. And here's the pivot. It's the question I'm going to ask you, Mr. Brulte, Senator Brulte at the time. Back in the summer of 2003, low point for the state budget. I was here, some other reporters here, late summer. You made a comment to Republicans thinking about voting for taxes. You said, I may campaign against you in your district next year. I may run somebody against you.
That's not what I said.
Okay, well, that was how it was reported.
You're close.
So now, okay, good, I'm close. That's all I really need. No, it's a bad joke. But at least one report called it intimidation. And I'm wondering, but for you, there was a leadership moment out of that in some way, or was there? And again, this is defining what it means to lead.
Yeah, let me set the table. I was the Senate leader. I had watched 2 straight years in a row where certain Republicans had voted for tax increases to get pork in their district. I mean, one guy got $3.6 million for some Italian meeting hall. Sacramento Bee did a really nice, interesting
tax credit one time, I think.
And so they voted for tax increases on my constituents to get pork for theirs. And so what I said in a joint caucus, it wasn't a secret, we had both the Senate and the Assembly Republicans, I said, I'm sick of you bastards voting to tax my constituents to get something for yourselves. And by the way, you've raised taxes twice in a row, and the budget deficit has grown in both years. So here's the deal. If you want to vote for a tax increase, have at it. I'll come into your district. I will campaign against you. I will debate you. I will make my case. And if Republican primary voters agree with me, I'm all right with that. If they agree with you, I'm all right with that too. Now, that, you know, I read the press said I threatened to get the party to endorse against them, which, by the way, the party rules didn't allow that. I threatened to put hundreds of thousands of dollars against them. By the way, I could only transfer three.
But may I ask, was that you? Was
3,000, so.
But was that a moment of I mean, is that, again, that's the leadership representing your constituency versus the party versus the politics?
Sure, because look, if you're the pro tem or the speaker, there are three ways you can lead your caucus. Through force of personality, the ability to reward or punish, you're off this committee. Or a combination of both.
And
if you're the minority leader, you don't get to reward and punish. You have to do it through force of personality. And I said, look, if you want to go ahead and do this, go. I'll debate you in your district. I thought it was critical because I was frankly tired of these guys selling out, voting for tax increases, and watching the deficit grow each year, because raising taxes, not every tax increase adds more revenue, some does. But if you don't combine spending restraint, you're not getting anywhere. So that was the only way I could leverage people that I was concerned about. I got some of the greatest editorials kicking my butt that I've ever seen, and I became a hero among Republican primary voters. So I did it because, frankly, I was frustrated. If you recall, in 2003, Governor Davis at the time, we had a $28 billion deficit. He proposed $11 billion in tax increases. And John Burton and I ended up negotiating a deal that had no tax increases, and we had a lower deficit than what the governor had proposed. So yeah, you call it whatever you want. I had a point to make. I thought I made it forcefully. Liberals in the press didn't like it, but you know what? None of them voted for me anyway. So,
couldn't have. I'm not in your district.
So but it's a great example, and Jim Brulte.
I have one for you too, by the way.
Oh, go ahead. Well, then go ahead.
No, but
well,
go ahead,
Jim Brulte to me, is going to go down as one of the great leaders. I mean, it's why he's always comes back and speaks. Why he's so popular and all. And I think as he explains what he just explained, there's actually more logic to it than what I believed at the time. That what you were frustrated with was the vote for so little, in a way. But the problem is,
if you're gonna sell out, go big, man.
Well, that's kind of the point. But
a $1.2 billion tax increase, and you get 4.3 million.
I know. You're right.
Go get 100 million.
You're right. But here's what it perpetuated a little bit. So now I'm going to take the other side, because what it perpetuated a little bit is litmus test politics. And the problem we had in California for such a long time, I would say on both sides, but a little bit more on the Republican side, because the tax issue was so prominent in terms of the combination of tax cuts and spending cuts necessary to balance budget during deficits, that litmus test politics lead to dysfunction. They do, and we see it in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's why John Boehner quit, because he was a pragmatist and he wanted to make deals with, the evil Obama, and he couldn't, and so he ends up quitting. And in California, in Sacramento, it seems to me that over the last 5 to 6 years, maybe out of necessity, maybe because Jerry Brown is is who he is, we've gotten away, I think, more from sort of that litmus test politics, and I think that's a healthy thing.
Well, I think Prop 25 helped that, but let me just say really quickly,
yes.
I got some policy things I want to talk about too, but just really quickly, to an experience of yours, another thing that I got to see. It's a fun job up here. So in December 2008, we were in all the fiscal crises.
Yes.
You were in your position as pro tem. you couldn't get the votes for the taxes, which is kind of the tax thing we've talked about a lot of times. You rolled out this idea that would raise revenues in the general fund, lower them in the special fund, and it was revenue neutral. And Republicans called it trickery. And my thing is, was that leadership of a different kind, or maybe would others say what you should have done, what Governor Schwarzenegger at the time should have done, is gone out and made the case, been a leader, made the case for the taxes somewhere else? Or are you saying that was impossible? Because again, I think leadership can take lots of different ways. Leadership can say, I'm going to go around the immovable object, or leadership can say, I'm going to move the immovable object.
So I want to answer your question, but maybe in a slightly different way that's illustrative of the point you're trying to make. In 2009, when we did the historic budget deal, one of the earliest budgets in state history to avert the tacit bankruptcy, we were heavily criticized, and maybe rightfully, but I say rightfully in quotes, because we did not put that budget out for 72 hours or 48 hours or even 24 hours for public review. We negotiated in secret, the so-called Big Five, and when we produced that budget, we went right to the floor, and it still took 42 hours and 2 all-nighters to get the bare minimum number of votes necessary to pass the budget. And we were criticized by the press and by people who didn't like the deal for not being more transparent. And you know what? Here's the truth. If we had put that budget out for public scrutiny, we never would have passed the budget. That is a catch-22 that I don't know how to quite reconcile. Because I don't say that it was right, but it was absolutely necessary, because that budget was nothing but bad. It was tax increases. It was the deepest forms of cuts. The unions, I mean, AFSCME mailed into my district saying that I didn't care for working people. CTA ended up putting up billboards in my district, some months later. Obviously, what happened to Dave Cogdill and Mike Valines, they were thrown out of their leadership. And so sometimes leadership is doing that which is unpopular, and maybe in some ways reconciling that nothing is perfect, and that you can't always get it all right in order to get the big thing right. And we got that budget right, at least in the beginning, but it was done in a completely imperfect way.
So, but let me ask 2 of your colleagues, Senator Hancock, Senator Lieu here, who have both staked out their time in the legislature on particular policies that you have a passion on. Right. Senator Lieu with education, Senator Hancock with crime and punishment issues. Given how many big things have going on, how do you, I mean, there's an element of leadership too, that when people say, we don't have time for that right now. There's no bandwidth for that. There's no, that's a great idea, Senator, but I got to X. How do you persevere in those? How do you keep, I mean, because I sense that those issues, you're playing at a longer game. You're not playing a 12-month fiscal year. You're moving the ball in a different, it's a different kind of...
It isn't. It certainly is an education, and I would say that the governor here plays a huge role. I mean, because he came out and he really staked his platform on education reform. Everybody's tired of hearing the reform word, and but he's also been able in this last couple of years to be able to put more resources into it. And for those of us in the legislature, we have to kind of take the, as far as I'm concerned, take kind of the not a back seat, but at least a side seat in terms of what we need to supplement what he's doing in the classroom. And for me, it's teacher professional development and all, other kinds of things. He vetoed a bill of mine this year because I want to see more oversight in our higher education the 3 tiers, the community colleges, the CSUs, and the UCs. And he didn't want to create another bureaucracy. We knew he was going to veto it, and we were hoping that he would give us a message about what he would accept, but he didn't.
So do you come back next year?
Of course. Of course. And so, but it's this constant movement, and hopefully we move a little bit further along the road. I mean, it's interesting because, I'm going to complete my, I guess, 14 years next year in the legislature, and so was Loni Hancock. And we've tied these 2 issues of public safety and education really tightly together because they go hand in hand about what is going on in terms of our society and how we can seek to improve people's conditions. And we've taken our time looking at not only what's going on here in California, but what's going on in the other western parts of the world. And we have lots to learn from other people. So, you know, it's part of a larger conversation. Education movement is incremental. It just snail's pace. Loni and I were talking about this yesterday. We were down visiting a state prison. And it is something that we hope that over time, and if you get somebody to take our place that is pretty empathetic about what goes on in terms of public policy, that we can move that agenda forward and we can improve the life of Californians. We have so many issues in here, and I know you all are really well schooled, and you know, so many crises and so many things happening that need to be addressed. And I'm just one of those who can take a little piece of it. The PPIC was instrumental in my getting work on the community college bills, because we need, you know, 1 million more BAs by 2025. You keep on moving the target, but anyways, but we talked about so if that's the issue, then how do we get there? Right. How do you back it up, and how do you move forward on issues?
Do you ever, Senator Hancock, do you ever get discouraged on some of these? These are long fights, long quests, long goals.
No, I never get discouraged. Yeah, actually, looking ahead to the fate of the Earth, if you will, I worry. 2 degrees Celsius is pretty close, everybody. And then our grandchildren aren't really going to have a place that is very conducive to human life. And the economic forces against taking the bold action that we need to take on our environment are made very difficult. Makes it difficult to do that. And that goes back to another issue that I've been concerned about and not been able to do very much about all these years, which is public financing of elections, money in the democratic process, and how it impacts policy decisions, who can run, who will run. And I have to say, since we adopted the top 2 primary, and 2/3 vote for both fees and taxes, the top 2 primary, of course, means you have to raise about $700,000 twice instead of once. Doubles the money. It's a huge problem. So yeah, I do worry, but I have to say, when we did Prop 25, it was just so annoying, because we would sit there into the summer, and the press, any of you here?
That would be me.
The press, John, would say, the legislature is bickering again. That was the mantra. And come on, there were big issues: taxation, people's lives, education, everything. But it was always the legislature's bickering again. One thing Prop 25 did is it clarified there was not enough money. And after a couple of years of nauseating, heartbreaking cuts, the public got it too. And the California public voted for taxes. So I think transparency and clarifying where people are is very, very important. But just on one other note, I think both Carol and I have been dealing with the governor lobbying the big issue over the, which is back to Jim's point, the governor has the platform. 109, corrections, realignment, local control funding formula. I mean, we now have to do the incremental steps to, in my case, ensure that we join the national movement to end mass incarceration as our major public safety strategy. And the good news is, as Jim probably knows, this is bipartisan. You got people, Newt Gingrich, Grover Norquist, the group Right on Crime. It's closed 3 prisons in Texas. And as Chuck DeVore, former legislator here, who's now their policy director, said when he came to our budget hearing, you want to Shrink government, let me tell you. Close prisons. You want to close prisons? Rehabilitate. Carol and I are now working on an initiative that the governor put money in the budget for last year to start restorative justice and reaching back into our public schools to identify kids in trouble very early on and get them and their families the help they need. Break the school to prison pipeline. So it's baby steps.
Yeah, that's a legislative effort you're talking about, not an initiative as in ballot initiative, just to clarify.
Oh, yeah, no.
Fair enough.
The ballot initiatives,
We'll have plenty of those next year.
Yes.
we will have a lot of them, and they're going to have to be deconstructed to what's your public interest, rightly or wrongly. We may not agree with the position coming from concerned constituencies, and what might be gaming the system for some particular advantage of somebody.
So let me offer some of you a couple of questions, a few questions here if you've got some succinct ones. I've got other ones, but I'm going to defer to you for a moment, and then
That's true.
Senator Brulte doesn't make his plane. I will hear about it for the next 3 times that I see him. I think there's one in the back there. We'll start over there. And there are microphones, by the way, they're coming around.
Hello, thank you for being here. I really enjoyed this, the talk. My name is Olga Sid, but I'm concerned about ISIS and the terror throughout the world. Is the legislature are they speaking with the governor or the governors of the nation? What plans or caucuses or thoughts do you have on that? Even though it's federally, I understand it's a federal issue, but we're part of that federal issue.
And we have 2 sitting legislators and 2 former, so let me defer to the sitting legislators first. Do you feel is there a role? Do you want to be involved in some way in this?
I think we need to be kept apprised as to what's going on, and I would agree with Nancy McFadden when she talked about the federal government having that conversation, continual conversation with the executive branch, and that should happen too with us in the legislature. Not that we can, we're not responsible for arms and all that other thing, but it needs to be a greater coordination. We need to know about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I pretty much agree with what President Obama said. We obviously need to look very carefully at who's coming in and placing them in communities that will embrace them, because marginalized communities lead to problems. Right. But we're talking women, children, we're talking about people really fleeing, just like really in the Second World War. And we did close our doors a lot to people who were fleeing the Nazis, and we don't want to do that again.
Let me move to another question in the audience. Or there wasn't another question in the audience. Well, then I'm going to ask a question, because I got like a lot of them, don't worry. It's kind of occupational hazard in my universe. Let me shift a little bit, because I do think this is instructive about leadership quickly. In the universe we live in now, we used to talk about a 24-hour news cycle. Actually, we used to not talk about that, but we talked about a 24-hour news cycle when I was a teenager. Then it was a 24-second news cycle. It's a 24-character news cycle. That's a Twitter joke now. I've watched interest groups. I've watched party loyalists. I've watched everyone push and pull on the legislature in the last few years, even while you're on the floor debating a bill. I have watched people reading their phones, and they get Twitter reaction. Don't vote on X, don't vote on Y. They get pushed and pulled in this instantaneous universe. What has that done to the notion of leadership and governing?
If you show me the structure of an institution, I can pretty much predict outcomes. And you talk about Twitter, but I think there's a much greater problem that needs to be addressed. Loni and I would come at this from different directions, but she's identified campaign finance. Legislators are pushed and prodded by special interests, because at the end of the day, special interests we have given them more ability to influence legislators than they should have. For example, let's say Loni is an outstanding representative always in touch with her community, and she goes out and finds 200 citizens of her district to max out to her. I don't know what it is now, $4,200. So she works really hard, finds 200 people, and she gets $840,000. I can list 10 special interests that can put $3 million in an independent expenditure committee against her.
Or one,
because,
in some cases.
Or one, because she's limited in what she can get, but the special interests are unlimited in how much they can spend against her. So it is not irrational to expect members who have to go on the ballot to pay attention to what the California Teachers Association thinks, SEIU, Chamber of Commerce, Jobs PAC, the realtors. It's not irrational for legislators to say, oh my goodness, you know, and as long as you limit the ability of individual candidates to get contributions at this level, and you allow independent expenditure committees to get contributions 2, 3, 4, 500 times that, special interests are going to have an inordinate amount of authority. Yeah. And that's not an irrational thought, and it doesn't make legislators of either party evil. It just makes them smart.
There's one question in the back that may be our ender. Briefly, Senator Hancock.
Okay.
I don't have that horn in the Fox debate, but
I agree with Jim. And I see that
wait a minute. My heart.
that took care of his bold leadership.
I served for 6 years with your husband. He never agreed with me once.
Well, carrying on from that
That's
remark.
sorry.
But one of the deep problems that concerns me about the whole syndrome is the erosion of trust in government. And I want to thank Mark Baldassare because a number of years ago, Mark was always reporting, the PPIC was always reporting that, oh, trust in government was down again, but never anything about why. And I asked him, I said, my hunch is it's the money. Could you think of a question and ask? And they did. And the question was, Sacramento is run for a few big interests, not for people like me. And good question, and 64% of the people or something agreed with it. And I thought, uh-oh, because it's that erosion of trust that leads to things like an 8% voter turnout in LA in the last election.
Yes, but can I get a second here?
Very. This is like a Republican
I
debate.
believe that campaign finance reform is also an existential question. I agree with Jim Brulte. The campaign finance reform as we have it now is a joke because of independent expenditures. Special interests are more authority than anywhere. But there's also some responsibility for the people who are elected to office to actually filter some of that stuff out and to make wise decisions. And there's also responsibility by people who, the citizenry who say, I don't want to get involved in this stuff because it's too ugly to get involved, because squeaky wheels do get the grease, including citizen activists. You know, and legislators listen to people in their districts too. The last thing they want is, you know, to be criticized in their home base. And so we sometimes, if you look through history, there have been always special interests. And yes, technology has made it different and more pervasive, but it's also about the character of the people we elect and with the expectation that they're sometimes going to exercise independent judgment.
All right, let's see if we can have, no, we're going to, she's got it. You can buttonhole them right after the event, I promise, because the microphone just ran away. I want to thank the four legislators and former legislators, and Mark Baldassare has a few other. Okay. Thank you.
Nice. John, you've done a fabulous job with a really stellar panel. Thank you to the panel for both discussing leadership as well as your leadership. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody who joined us today for this, this event. And also thank once again our sponsors. And please look for our events next year. We look forward to continuing the conversations about these issues. Thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.